Hello there and welcome to More Than a Lumpy Jumper. This week we are talking silos, walls, bridges and other building terms as we explore the pros and cons of silo working. Where, if at all, can they work in an organisation? Our own experiences of when they haven't worked. And how, as a leader, do we deal with silo mentality? So join us for being a wall breaker.
What did you call the episode again, Bobby?
A wall breaker.
Okay, just clarifying that.
I don't think ball is a building term, but I might be wrong. How are you anyway?
I'm good. Sorry. I can't stop laughing now. Yeah, I think I've OD'd on chocolate. My husband has just popped away for 2 weeks to Tunisia, and he left me his hidden Easter chocolate stash because I wouldn't let him out the door until he told me where he'd hid the chocolate bunny that that he had half of.
He hasn't even been gone 20 minutes.
No.
And you've already started in on it. Oh my God.
Yeah, so sorry, sugar rush. Right. I will
Brilliant. So
pull myself together. Silos.
Oh, yeah, don't pull yourself together. It's much more interesting when you don't. We start talking about pigeons crapping on chessboards and goodness knows what else. So God knows what you're going to come up with today.
Yes. Nothing has popped into my head just yet, but I'm sure it will as we go along.
Just yet. Yeah. So what's your experience of silos then, Bridge?
Yeah, so I think I have a lot of experience of working in silos and none of them have been positive. So I used to work for the United Nations and they are renowned for issues of silos. You know, this isn't just a UN bashing thing because in my experience, all bureaucracies, large bureaucracies tend to have that silo mentality. And it's really difficult to break it down, to break those walls, wall break, even if it does involve ball breaking as well. Because I think there's lots of reasons, and I'm sure that we will go through some of them. But the impact it has is that it slows down any decision making, which is incredibly frustrating, especially when you're in an organisation that's supposed to be doing good, and it stifles innovation because one of the things that comes out of or creates silos, or I don't know whether it's a cause and effect thing, but this issue of knowledge is power. It was something that I experienced a lot, that people, leaders particularly, and organisations within the UN, because the UN's got lots of agencies, funds and programmes that are all vying for funding and for being, there's a whole political element. So it's not as simple as just, this is, here are the three things that cause it. Let's get rid of those and then we all solve, the world's problems. But I do think that there's a real issue where politics and power are endemic or part of the organisation, that then holding on to knowledge to give you power is sort of a mindset that you often find, and that is one of the things that creates silos.
I was thinking back, having worked in a number of organisations, but the one that struck me the most was actually at getting the job because of silo working, which sounds a bit bizarre. But I was asked by the recruitment agency that I needed to give a 5-minute presentation, 5 minutes, me just talking for 5 minutes. That was a quest in itself, on how to break down silo working. So I said to them, right, well, I'm going to draw a picture. I will have to try and work out how to put this picture into the links. So I thought about silo working, and I think that, to your point about knowledge sharing, it's one of them. I also think it's hierarchical, and that's how people like it in terms of how an organisation has been designed.
Yeah.
But I also think it's when processes are shit as well. where you've ended up with a process of multiple handoffs just to completely overcomplicate things. And often, if you go all the way back to the knowledge is power or a very controlling leader, what's tended to happen in a process with too many handoffs in it is approval processes. So I've got to go back and get this signed in triplicate because, and so if you think about all of that, where does that land us with? Trust.
Yeah.
And so I'd not been in this organisation, but I wrote about those key aspects as to when I don't think silo working is particularly healthy. And then I wrote about the things that you really, or that I would concentrate on that would enable, not necessarily to bust the silos, but in some respects, maybe, but how could you work differently so that you didn't seem to be so strangleheld by what was going on? And actually being in the organization, it became very, very clear that there was one of the people on the executive management team who was very much around knowledge is power and controlling everything. So those elements about the functions that they were controlling had huge impacts on everybody else. They went to set objectives without thinking about the interdependencies for other parts of the organisation, as long as they were okay. The massive approval processes so that they could control everything. And it basically brought the organisation almost to a standstill.
Wow.
So I was overjoyed to have got the job, realising quite how much was needed to be done. But for me, a bit like you, I have seen quite how detrimental that silo mentality, when it's looked at like that, what impact it can have on everybody in an organisation.
Yeah. Well, that leads me on to my latest girl crush. Sorry, Brené. Sorry, St. Brené. Cheryl Cran. And I mentioned her when we had our gift sessions on collaborative leadership. And she identifies a lot of the things that you've talked about, the autocratic leadership, only looking out for my department, my people, how it's going to impact on me as a leader is one of the things that can create silos. And she talks about it in terms where she talks about lots of things, but two really interesting things that I'm going to be interested to hear your take on. She talks about one of the fundamental elements of how you address silos, or when you can anticipate silos, is how leaders react to other people, whether you're competitive or cooperative. So, if you're open and collaborative as a leader, we talked about collaborative leadership. If that's how you view things, then you're much more likely to have non-siloed work. And she talked about some examples of what organizations sometimes do to try and break down silos or prevent them forming in the first place. And she talked about things like visit times, so that departments sort of visit other departments and see kind of how, life in their shoes. So they start to be able to anticipate how decisions they make might impact on other departments. But she was saying, we're in the 21st century now, friends, and actually this sort of visiting people face-to-face stuff isn't always going to be possible. And actually we should start to leverage tech. So she was talking about departments within organizations doing videos or virtual tours of their own department, so that, people can start to see what everyone else does, where they fit into the, as a cog. Nobody wants to be viewed as a cog, how we all fit into the system. But she also said that it's not just about leaders sort of waiting to be told where they fit in or what other parts of the organization do, that actually good leaders would take the initiative to find out what other people are doing, so that everybody, not just the leaders, but all employees, understand what everyone else does. Because then if you've got those multiple perspectives, she talks about multiple perspectives as a way to break down silos. And I love her phrase, link up to sync up. Link up and sync up are the ways to sort of start to break down these silos. So yeah, Cheryl Cran, I think she's got a book or a program called Rewire, and I'll put some of those in the link. But yeah, she's my new girl leadership crush, lady leadership crush, woman leadership
lady
crush.
leadership crush, like that. I like that. In similar vein, I was thinking about how they happen. And this experience that I've had, you could definitely see it from the department team perspective and the hierarchy because of this very competitive leader and controlling autocratic leader. Geography, which also came into play in this, and scheduling. So about when people are working. And I think that may well be creating another interesting phenomenon now with hybrid working.
Yeah.
When people are in the office and when they're not, and what as a result do people silo around? Because it's not necessarily people in the same department, it's same experiences or as I say, same time that they're going into work or whatever it might be. So it can work in very different ways. So I absolutely agree with Saint Cheryl on all of that. The competitive cooperative bit, I think, is incredibly important as well. And if I think back to this scenario, I'm thinking of, I am very competitive, but not in a way where I can see it's going to be absolutely detrimental to people. I wouldn't be in the jobs that I've had if that was the case. And one of the things that I read when I was preparing for this, and I love it, which is where the word bridge comes in, which I think is exceptional when I now think about you, Bridge, being the bridge.
Yay.
And I like to think of myself as a bridge as well. But people will often say, well, what do you do to rid yourself of silos? So, of course, some organisations will try to go for the whole on redesigning the entire structure.
Yeah, of course.
And, how costly and confusing that can be. And if you've got that mentality in the leaders, it doesn't matter where you actually decide to shuffle the pieces, the same outcome will be there.
Yeah, you're just rebuilding other silos, right? Just different silos.
Absolutely. Whereas I think, that's link up and sync up. Absolutely. It's the bridges that you create between them. So that's why I like to think of myself as a bridge, because, especially in the jobs that I've had, I've often used to say, look, you can invite me or I'll gate crash anyway, because people are everywhere. People have everything to do with anything in an organisation. And with the titles I have, it would be worthwhile having me sat at the table so that you do begin to see how other parts of the organisation are working. You stand in other people's shoes, what their ways of working are like, whatever it might be. But the trick is to try to, as Cheryl is saying, linking them up. I think that's really, really important. We can talk about the different elements that you can do with that. I think the other point just that I'd like to make, though, is that because my experience of being in organisations where silos have been far too prevalent, people often think of them as bad. And I've come across, occasions where actually they're not always bad. So if you are, the virtual project team or a project team, in certain respects, is a silo. They might be working separately on something, which makes sense from a focus or a building of community to actually get something moving and some progress. It's not a bad thing. What you've then got to do is to make sure, again, using Cheryl's words, is it links back in. So I think my example with that, again, from my own experience, is that often, I've been in a position where things have got to change. There's a transformation project going on. And what organisations often do is that they want you doing the business as usual, as well as being the team that are doing the transformation. It's impossible.
Yeah.
Whereas that sort of shadow team who are looking at what the change needs to look like, or what is it that we're actually aspiring for? What does the to be look like? Putting that to one side so that they can focus and make progress rather than forever being dragged back into the day-to-day, I would suggest is an effective way of using a silo, ready for it to be relinked back in. So I'm just going to say that because I don't think they're always bad.
Yeah, and I agree. I think, having something that's focused on something, but I think it's having the silo that is just a silo is the problem.
Yeah.
But as you were talking, I was sort of thinking, let's create a new job title or a role in organizations, as in the chief wall breaker. So it is someone who goes and sits in on all the meetings and is able to then, to say, this piece of information I was just at that meeting where they said this, and I think that, there needs to be a link up here. I think every organization should have a chief wall breaker to ensure that there is some interconnectedness. I found an article in HBR, which is How to Lead Across a Siloed Organization by Rosenthal and Rosen, and they talk specifically about cross-functional leadership. So I wonder if you would have a role within an organization that is there to sort of be the nosy Parker, to know everything. I'd love that job, actually. I'd be really good at it. And then start to go, oh, you need to talk to this person, and this is happening, and did you know about this? But they identified a whole load of things that are fundamental for this cross-functional leadership. And one of them, which that talked about curiosity and connection skills. And I think we've talked about curiosity, we've talked about connection and communication across the board. And it's just such a fundamental leadership skill, that it impact every single, it gets raised every single episode that we have. But humility was one of the things that they identified. And I really like that, because that was effectively the being a student in your own organization, having that learning mindset or that beginner's mindset, and looking for expertise everywhere. So in contrast to the leader who thinks they know everything and micromanages, is looking for who else can I go and get help from or offer help to. And rather than being competitive, you said, you are competitive, I'm competitive. There's nothing wrong with being competitive, but you're trying to find ways to win together rather than trying to win me. I won, look at me. And the loveliest thing that they said, because I think everybody knows from, if they ever listen to these podcasts, that I'm really into sort of the senses, was that you make purple. So I bring red, you bring blue, we're going to make purple, which I just think is...
Oh, I like that.
My heart sang a little bit when I read that.
Oh, I really like that. Oh, that's so cool. And we've been talking recently about, again, in one of our other episodes, about dealing with imposter syndrome and celebrating success. I am going to talk about me and my successes a bit, because I am the nosy Parker. I am the getting in there and asking all sorts of questions. And the boss did recruit me with this picture that I drew of silo working. Actually told me that he recruited me because he knew that I would be so different to everybody else, and being the disruptor in a good way. We're going, well, why do you do it like that? But I have also, both there and subsequently and before, been very, very committed to having people in my team who aren't just HR or considered as just HR, that statement, or fluffy, which we've also talked about, because they are partners. And I expect them, when they've been to meetings with different departments, to come back with knowledge about how they work, how they tick, what it is that they're actually up to, so that we can be the people who are helping with that jigsaw or the bridges.
Yeah.
So that if we know that they're doing in a particular part of the organisation, when we go somewhere else, go, oh, well, have you spoken to whatever department it might be? Because I don't know that that's lining up with what you're planning on doing.
Yeah.
Or you are doing something very similar to them. There's no point you both slamming resources at it. And so whilst we were doing that singly in certain respects, bringing my people partners back together and going, okay, so what did you pick up? I am great at listening to be nosy, love a bit of gossip, as long as it's constructive, whatever it might be. But however you want to describe it, but that collecting of information to do better for everybody is part and parcel of how I've gone about my role. Yeah, the same could have applied when I was working in hotels. Hotels are their own environment, their own silo in certain respects. And there needed to be a respect that they were a business in their own right, but we needed to know the things that we could do consistently, or how did we co-join them? When was it necessary for us all to be dancing to the same tune? And when was it okay for them to just do it the way that worked best for them? And so your point about curiosity, creativity, those elements are absolutely fundamental if you want to be a bridge.
And I do wonder, what holds people back. And as you're talking about, everything that you're saying is obviously makes sense. Of course we should be talking, other departments should be linking in, because one of the massive things that I noticed within the UN itself was just recreating the wheel constantly, and sort of things that were just maybe parallel, but actually could have been aligned, or developing, resources being put into developing something that actually, if it had just been cranked a little bit, could have satisfied the needs of two organizations. I found it immensely frustrating, this task duplication. But I do think that having tried and failed often to try and persuade organizations to collaborate and to share information at a point at which it's useful, because often people will share the information at the end and everyone's like, bollocks. Whereas if you'd shared it at the beginning, why aren't we talking to each other when we're creating a project, or we're just ideating the project, so that we can create something that maybe would be better than the two ideas separately? But people are afraid of interference, or losing their, losing the control over the process. And again, I think that comes back to this finding ways to win together, that so many leaders, and maybe it is because of the organization, because when it's political and everyone's vying for power or recognition, and all of that comes down to the fact that maybe if the organization gave recognition more willingly, more often, acknowledged, actually valued, had a value of collaboration and celebrated collaboration, that then the leaders wouldn't be so afraid of what they will lose. Because, that's always the fear, isn't it? In any form of change, is what am I going to lose? Rather than fearing what they're going to lose, to be excited about what the benefits are. And so I do think
what
that
they're going to gain.
Absolutely. But I can absolutely envisage some of the leaders that I've spoken to, their reaction has been, I don't want another department to work with another department. Why would I want to do that when I'm already, we're going to do this thing. It will work here. Yeah, it might not be as brilliant as what you're suggesting, but it will be all mine and we'll get all the recognition.
I think it's a speed and delivery thing as well. So there is the recognition. Of course, that's completely counterintuitive, because if you do it, it has a nasty impact elsewhere, and so becomes a complete cluster. You're not going to get the recognition that you actually want. And now, if I think back to one of my very early roles after I'd left the army, I had a new HR system to put in. And, people kept saying it needs to interface with finance. And I didn't want to have to work with finance. So I did involve them. I did involve them too late. And it caused a massive delay. And that's entirely on me. I learned the hard way on that. And, actually doing some more wall, both breaking earlier on would have been much better for all of us. So, I've put in HR systems since then, and I have made absolutely sure that finance take a large role on that, but they weren't easy to work with. It was going to slow things down. I wanted it done like yesterday, all of my usual traits. So I tried to circumvent, and it didn't work. So I think it is the winning thing, but I think it's the speed, and you don't want obstacles landed in your way. And if you perceive them all as obstacles, when in actual fact it's a case of it's things that you should be taking account of, that's where it can all go quite awry as well, in my humble experience.
I think that point you make about viewing other departments as obstacles is a really big issue that I've encountered a lot. And I confess also having been guilty of, and I think finance is often the one that gets that sort of real, everyone's just rolls their eyes and goes, oh God, because they're viewed as I think when we talked about the different parts of a team in the team episode, about that, you need the people who raise the, sort of put their hands up and are a bit pessimistic and go, but, you do need to take account of this. And I'm there going, no, I don't want to talk about this because I want this. I've got my vision and we're going to get there. And you're always sticking pebbles in the way of my lovely, fast moving train. But one of the other things that I've seen happen is that, take the example that you've given where the leader hasn't involved a department, and we'll use finance as an example, at the beginning, and then there's been unintended consequences, unforeseen consequences, or maybe they should have been foreseen. But then rather than, as you did, owning it and saying, yep, okay, that's my bad, next time I will do something different, it's just to blame the finance department. And just to say, we can't get anything done because, see, it's the finance department. They are always, they're always the ones that are holding back. And the finance department's going, but nobody told us. Why are we getting the blame? Why do we always get told that we're the hurdles? And so I do see that a lot in organizations, is when there hasn't been collaboration, but then the blame goes on the department or the leader or the person who wasn't even involved in it, but still gets the blame. And then it becomes the circle that everyone's like, oh, that person, that's the thing that causes the problem. So they get even less involved. So they continue to be left out of the conversation.
I tell you what's just leapt into my mind, which almost makes me think, God, you and I should have known so well how to do this very, very young, is because of our signals training from when we were in the army. And I don't know about you, but I often heard people say, oh, they've got other enditis. So it was never you, it was the other end of whatever communication connection that you were trying to paint. But I mean, we're here referring to them as bridges. But we used to have to set up communication networks that were like little, hubs, silos, whatever you want to call them, that could work on their own, but they weren't any good if they weren't connected up to anything else.
Yeah. Nice analogy.
And I'm just thinking, what the bleeding hell didn't I think of that when I sort of like landed in my first corporate job? Because things might have been a little bit different, but yeah, bridges, connections, I think it's all very important. And I guess, my learning from it was that, again, organisations are really quick to play the blame game a lot of the time. Yeah. And I think in my role, and another commitment was always to, where somebody else was getting the blame, you needed to go and find out why.
Yes.
Find out why at the other end, as well as taking responsibility for the bit that might have been you.
Yeah.
And then having that conversation together to try and work it out. So I think that the other thing that I probably feel that I got quite good at was to be creating opportunities for conversation outside of your normal department. So what would you huddle about? What's the networks you could create? What were the focus groups? Where could you have collisions almost? Like bumping into somebody. I would deliberately bump into people sometimes so I could have a conversation. We talked about the 5 cups of coffee.
Yes.
But where do you create a different environment to be able to not just hear the sound of your own department or your department lead? And when I was thinking about that, I'm wondering about what are the things that we should be putting in place now that there is so much working from home, because you could end up with a lot of isolation and every single person being a silo in their own right because of the lack of interaction that they're actually getting with each other.
I think it's a really, really important conversation. When I've been going through, sort of looking at articles and discussions about silos and how we break them down or how we connect them if they are things that are necessary, one of the real keywords that comes up again and again is isolation. Isolation is one of the things that causes silos or prevents focus groups working with each other. The question that everyone's asking is, so is remote work going to cause a worsening of silos? Is it already causing a worsening of silos? And hybrid working came up as one of the 4 causes of silos in one article that I was reading, not for the sake of it, but because if you have impromptu meetings, as you say, those, I accidentally bumped into someone to have a conversation with, or you'll see them walking past and you're like, can I just have a quick chat? Because, you're thinking about something else, but when you see them, the idea pops into your head, oh yeah, that's the person I need to see. But because, out of sight, out of mind, how can you have impromptu meetings? How can you be sure that you've got everyone that you need into these impromptu meetings or these meetings that are cross-functional? So then I sort of started to think about, okay, well, hybrid working is a reality for many organizations, whether they like it or not. And even if things are changing, then, there's a lot of hybrid working. So what are the things that can be done to sort of mitigate the impact or the potential impact of remote working on isolation, of ideas, of communication, of connection, of curiosity? And I go back to my lovely Cheryl and think about, tech. And while everyone's a bit like, we've all got used to Zoom, and actually sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And again, it's very much how we use the tools for me, and how we have, there's quite a lot of, I don't know, have you used, I can't remember the name of it at all now. Google's got one. They've kind of got these whiteboard apps where you can have sort of brainstorming. Miro, and yeah, and there's countless others. But actually understanding the capacity of those to have those, we hate meetings for the sake of meetings, but to have, a purpose of I really want to talk to 4 people, you and you. I just want to have a little 10 minutes of just like shoving some ideas on Post-its on Miro or whatever. But lots of people don't know how to use them. And in a way, a bit like the conversation we've had about ChatGPT, I don't know how to use it. I haven't got time to learn now. I've got a, I don't want to because I don't know how to use it. I like to already know how to use stuff. And for a lot of people, I suffer from that too. When I've been studying and we've got study groups together and they're like, oh, we're going to use Miro or whatever the equivalent is. And I'm like, oh, I fucking hate that, because I don't really know how to, I know it's got loads of capacity. There's a little bit of my brain that's going, yeah, there's all kinds of great things I could do and look at the potential for this. But my reptilian brain is going, don't know how to use it. Don't want to know how to use it. Fuck off. Bloody Generation Z, you fuckers. And so, oh gosh, maybe that was a little bit too much of a rant going on there. But I do think that there needs to be much more focus on how do we use tech? How do we use the potential of it to actually create some of the connections that we're missing? But also, can we agree on the communication methods that we're going to use, on the processes? Can we agree that if we've got information sharing platforms that we're all on the same page? I worked for an organization that was one UN agency that kind of was a partner with another UN agency, and we both used 2 different information platforms. So one had Teams and the other one was working everything on Google. And so when we created stuff in the Google Drive, we couldn't fucking share it with the other organization, who were the ones who had to do all the endless, 75 people had to give tick off on whatever it was, but couldn't access half the material. And then when they had material, we couldn't access it. They were on Teams, we were on Google Chat. I mean, just mental, like mind-blowingly mental. That, and of course, so our communication, our connection, everyone just was like, oh fucking hell. There's only one person who had access to both of the platforms. So that one person, if they went on leave, nobody, if I went on leave for 2 weeks, nobody spoke to each other about anything. And I'd come back with just lots of angriness going on from everyone, including myself, because I was going, why the fuck haven't you just got on with this job while I was away? Well, because we couldn't talk to them. Mental.
I think that there is that for all sorts of reasons. If I go back, so that we've said silos can come from the leader themselves, because there's the level of control. They can come from the work that's attempted to being done, the geography, the scheduling, all those things that we've said. And then there is also the barriers that we put up because of the way that things have been done. I'm with you about the whole technology. But there's the technology bit, but also the being over-meetinged. To try, so that people go, well, the one way to break down silos is for us to have a meeting. No, not necessarily. And so there is if you're the person going, oh my God, I don't know how to use AI yet, or Miro, or whatever it might be yet, an impromptu thought, and I take your point if you're not all on the same systems, but if you're all on Teams, shove it in Teams chat. I was just thinking about X. So in my mind, and this is what I've been thinking about, my mind, Teams chat could be the walking along the corridor and bumping into somebody. So you create the bump. The bringing people together for the conversation, don't let Miro stop you from having the meeting. Just do it without it until some bugger knows how to use it. So use the technology in the way that you can, rather than just going, I can't, or I never get to see this person, so I've never had the conversation. There is equally the telephone, which I think is being lost in the wilderness because people tend to text or WhatsApp or Slack or whatever it is. So there's never the chewing the cud to actually work something through. And that doesn't necessarily need to be a whole frigging team meeting. Just pick up the phone.
Bobby, also because actually texts and emails can so often be misinterpreted. I do think that, there is also this element of isolation in terms of how people can get very offended by, I've been reading about how you sign off on an email, also how the different generations interpret certain words or certain ways of how they've written the email as to whether or not it is insulting or whether it's not, whether, all of those sort of the complications of the culture that are so easy to misinterpret. Whereas if you actually just get on the phone and go, hi, I've sent you an email, but I just wanted to, see whether
clarify
there's anything
what I meant.
Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think a couple of other things, especially in this world of hybrid working now, where there is usually a screen between us rather than air, is as leaders to really take a look at your operating models and, have you created procedures that leave parts of an organization out that are going to be impacted or that you need in the mix, the procedures and processes bit. And I also think about that from not over approvals, but so that people know what's going on, quite what your messaging and communication channels are doing, how people are being informed and by what channel, because again, you can have an inundation of emails with, here's a newsletter from my silo, and then here's a newsletter from my other silo, So I think that's some of the things to think about. But the other element, and I don't mean it about just one leader now, but that collective voice of a leadership team. So I've witnessed, and I think we may well have talked about this before again, I've witnessed when silos are going on in the room, because that whilst you believe that you've just all agreed to something, some bugger is going to leave the room and do something completely different. And so the silo wanders off. And so, that culture that's required for that collective leadership team to make sure that when they're setting objectives, they've really done the test to understand the impact of what they're going off to do could have elsewhere of an organisation, and then making sure that the objectives that they set for the rest of the teams are as respectful of other people's time, resource, whatever it might be, as well. And we're back to the time piece. To get that right, that takes time, but blow me, honestly, it's worth doing it to actually stop being held up, and the blockades and the obstacles and the lack of trust and the irritation and whatever else might come up because of what's then gone on, because somebody's gone off to decide to just get back into their tube and do what the hell they like anyway.
I think that is, while it's not necessarily the crux, because obviously there's lots of sort of pieces that fit in, but it's incredibly important from an organizational point of view. And I have seen it so often where, as you say, the processes and the systems of communication, how you share information, how you confirm information has been agreed, and how you ensure that everybody, no one's dropped off that no one's been forgotten, and suddenly, 6 months down the line, oh fuck, we didn't let them know that, is really important, and takes, as you said, lots of time and finessing to look at how the processes actually work, if they actually work. So, simple things like, if Miro is your brainstorming tool, then onboarding should include
people have to how to use the bleeding thing.
Yeah. And then if you can see them that people still not being able to understand the whole thing, then you include it in your CPD or whatever you're doing in terms of your learning and development programming. Is okay, the most important thing that people need to know is how they use Teams, what the potentials are, and this is how you use Miro. And so, do regular training on it so that nobody falls off the wagon or falls off the inclusion. And the other thing is that is one of the bugbears of mine, is this idea, as you said, of people walking out a meeting and still not being on the same page as everyone. And the thing that I've seen, which is very frustrating, is that at the end of the meeting, someone shares the minutes and just goes, right, minutes, there you go, here's the minutes. But nobody, and lots of times people just don't read the minutes. I was at the meeting, I know what happened. But rather than have just a précis, and I used to always say to if I was asking one of my team to go to a meeting instead of me, I would ask them, and it started off, I'd go, can you let me know what happened in the meeting, just the bullet points? And they'd always just go, oh, here's the minutes. I said, I don't want the minutes. I want you to give me the points of what you understood came out of that meeting. And if I was in charge, I would follow up to say, okay, so, the main issues, the minutes are here, but just to clarify, if there was anything that there'd been quite a lot of discussion about, this was agreed. You can check the minutes for the detail, but these are the 5 steps that we all agreed was going to happen next. And you can look for the detail in the minutes. Because I do think that this, it's in the minutes, just check the minutes. Because also it depends on the minute taker, because often the most junior person in the room is taking the minutes and they don't know the import or the context of what's being discussed. So sometimes they'll leave out, oh, so-and-so didn't agree about that, and there was this discussion. Or I've been in places where they've just said minutes, just absolute bare bones. Nobody understands the context of any of the decisions.
Yeah. This has become an incredibly lovely, ranty recording, I have to say. I didn't realise it was going to be quite so volatile. But the whole thing with minutes for me, I'm all about progress. Yes, you need to know when somebody has disagreed on something or whatever it might be. But what you tend to find is that you're right. The most junior person has been asked to write the minutes. They might not understand all of the conversation that's been going on. And then people get up and leave the meeting. If I'm running a meeting, I say, right, round the table, what are you taking away from the meeting? What's your action?
Nice one.
What are you committing to? By when? And I make every single person do it. And that is almost like the summary for anyone who is taking the minutes of let's get the actions down. So that, everyone is having to give their own individual commitment. Whereas if somebody else has written it down, that's how people get away with just buggering off and doing what the hell they like. And I think I would describe that as creating habits of intervention. So I think that how silos get such a hold is because there are certain things habitually that are not done within organisations, from my own experience. And that is about review of where we're at, that progress piece that we're talking about. What's everyone's skin in the game here? Levels of monitoring, and also lessons learned.
Yeah.
And when you're doing that, that should be bringing everybody back into, everybody from different parts of the organisation together. I had a boss who used to bring everybody back in after a governance meeting, and we would have a conversation, our own conversation about how that went. What actions were we taking from? Who did we need to go and speak to? That sort of like element of just bringing things to a conclusion rather than the allowance of, well, that was all shit and I'm just going to go off and do my own thing anyway. Whatever meetings it might be. I think that there's those intervention pieces actually also help continue with the bridging of silos. So I think for me, I'm not sure that silos can ever be busted apart. I'm not even sure sometimes that's the right thing to do, but the constant work of linkage, communication, bridging, syncing, whatever word we want to use, I think is the most important piece for me.
Nice one. So we can focus on making purple. Bobby, we're coming to the end of this episode. I think that within what we've talked about, there's actually the potential for a couple more episodes on other things. Particularly, I'd love to do one on lessons learned. But have you got a quote?
I have. I almost want us to be left with make purple because I love, but here's something of a similar vein. Pride builds walls between people. Humility builds bridges.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Bobby.
Thanks, Bridge.
Bye. Thanks for listening. There was loads of juicy stuff in that episode, and the resources are all on our website, morethanolumpyjumper.com, and on the Spotify MTALJ page. Do check them out. There's a veritable treasure trove of information. Next week, Bobby and I are going to chat about getting older and how organisations can cater for a spectrum of ages in the workforce without descending into intergenerational warfare. In Ageing Disgracefully. See you then.